I'm Tony Frank. It's my honor to serve as the president of Colorado State University, and my joy to welcome all of you this evening to the first of this semester's President Community Lecture Series. Some of you who have been to these before know that we started these as a birthday present to the city of Fort Collins, a way of bringing some of our most engaged and most engaging faculty members back to the community to talk about things that they literally travel the world to speak about. Over those years, we've had some absolutely amazing lectures. Bill Ritter, Brian Wilson, Steve Withrow, Amy Prieto, so many others. And this is a special night for us because this is our 10th President's Community Lecture. And we'll hear something that is different than something we've done before, because this will be the first President's Community Lecture that involves not only the spoken word, but also performance as well. Dr. Joel Bacon is recognized literally around the world as both a professor and as a performer. He has performed in recital not just in the United States and Canada, but across Europe, having performed in Germany, Austria, France, and Switzerland. He originally comes from New Jersey, from a town that produced another reasonably famous musician named Bruce Springsteen. I imagine that Bruce Springsteen is often introduced as being from Joel Bacon's hometown. I don't know that for a fact, but I like that imagery. Joel went on to earn his PhD in historical musicology in a joint program through Vienna's School of Music and the Performing Arts in the University of Vienna. Before that, he had studied both organ performance and mathematics at Baylor University. And that combination, this interesting connection that exists between music and mathematics, is something that is no stranger to a close friend of mine, our Provost and Executive Vice President Rick Miranda. In fact, I'll share one quick story about Rick. Rick was a professor of mathematics here, then chair of the Department of Mathematics before being the Dean of the College of Natural Sciences, before I stole him to be the provost of our university. And when I was the provost and Rick was the dean, there was a graduation ceremony where the singer didn't show up. And Rick, undaunted, walked to the podium and a cappella sang the national anthem. That's a fairly impressive feat in and of itself. But at the Council of Deans the next week, I suggested to the other deans that we had now discovered a way to save money on graduation ceremonies. And Rick was reasonably unpopular for the next several months in that setting. Let me introduce to you my friend to give a bit more introduction to Dr. Bacon, our provost, Dr. Rick Miranda.
Thank you, Tony. I do know Joel pretty well. We've met, I think, about the first week Joel was here in Fort Collins. I was singing with the church choir over at St. Joe's, and we had a little a Sunday afternoon concert, and Joel wandered by the concert and listened to us, and then we had a party afterwards, and he showed up at the party, and our accompanist said, "Rick, you should meet this person. He seems to enjoy the choir." And he did enjoy the choir. He joined the choir, and we've been singing together on and off for 10 years now or so. We took the choir together to Ireland on a tour even. So he's also part of that European performance was in Ireland with us here. I also took several courses from Joel. I took a course in hymnology, and he's the endowed chair in organ and liturgical studies, and I took a course or two about the history of liturgical music from Joel. And he's just a wonderful instructor, and it was fascinating to watch how he would construct a session with the students around both the history of the music and the history of the liturgy and examples of the music, all wrapped in together. It was fantastic. He's a wonderful professor in that sense, not only a performer. He does fantastic outreach, I think, with regular performances, both here on campus in Fort Collins and around the state of Colorado. Being an ambassador for CSU, and one of the most beloved events of the year is his annual, well, it started out as the Spooky Organ Concert on Halloween. And I remember going to the first one, and it was really a fun affair, and people were dressing up. And they, well, now it's grown so that he has to do 3 of them, and this room is filled 3 times. And starting at 6 or 7 in the evening and going until past midnight on All Hallows Eve. So fantastic. You know, he oversaw the moving of the organ. It used to be in the Tilt building on campus on the Oval, and now I think it's still behind me here. And Joel, and you can imagine for an assistant professor just starting his career and saying, here, move this guy a mile away here. This was not a small event, so I know Joel was nervous about that, but it worked out very well. He also organizes Organ Week every year in the June time frame. He brings some of the most famous organists in the whole country here to our campus, working with students for a whole week and putting on a concert every single night. So if you get a chance to come to Organ Week, make sure you do that. You know, I mentioned his students. His concern for his students is really something impressive. And in my friendship with him, I've observed many times how he has nurtured students who have been singing with us, or after they've graduated. Joel tries to follow them and make sure that they have every chance they can to continue to develop their musical careers. He is an artist, and he says sometimes, well, you know, us creatives, we have certain idiosyncrasies. And so he does have idiosyncrasies, and I might mention a few of them. He had, some of his pet peeves are skateboards on campus. He is not a fan of skateboards on campus. He's not a fan of the digital faculty activity system, as far as I can know, for those faculty who are in the room. And his fondness for faculty meetings in general is legendary. I hear a lot about that at choir practice. And as I mentioned, we've sung together for about 10 years in the church choir. And he's written a bunch of pieces over the years, too, small things that the choir is capable of singing. And beautiful things, many of them. And when my oldest son got married 7 or 8 years ago, they asked me to select the music, and so I chose for the psalm a setting that Joel had written. And so when it was being sung at their wedding, I looked over to my son and his wife, and my son was in tears, listening to the psalm that Joel wrote. And it was a reminder to me of the power and impact that even simple tunes can achieve in both ordinary and sometimes extraordinary settings. And so singing together with Joel week in and week out, mostly in ordinary settings, I have to admit, has been a real gift for me. And that particular day, and watching what the impact of that particular song on our family was an extraordinary gift. And I want to thank him publicly for that, for composing that piece. And I want to thank him for coming up and doing this presentation tonight. Joel?
Thank you, Rick, for those very kind words. For your friendship over the years. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you, President Frank, for the invitation to speak tonight and to play a little bit. I'm honored to be a part of the President's series, the President's Community Lecture Series. So I want to thank the community that has come to hear it. Community is something that we do fairly well in this building, I think. Here at the University Center for the Arts, we open our doors to the community all the time, to our museum, to our theater and dance events, and of course to our many concerts. We sometimes call you audience, but I like the word community better. Music is not only for community, I believe very strongly that music creates community. And the experiences that I've had making music here in Fort Collins, sharing it with people like Rick, and many of you who I see here tonight, that's what creates our community. So thank you for coming. I'm here to talk about our organ, but I'd like to start this evening with a story about Johann Sebastian Bach. In 1705, when Bach was a 20-year-old, about the age of my students, right, he set out on the greatest journey of his life, walking over 250 miles from his home in Arnstadt in central Germany, a little town, and he left it and walked all the way to the very wealthy seaport city of Lübeck in the north. He was on a mission to hear the legendary organist and composer Dietrich Buxtehude, who was 68 years old at the time. Buxtehude had a reputation for being the greatest organist in Germany. And Bach would have been familiar with his compositions, which were circulated in handwritten copies of manuscripts. But Bach wanted to hear Buxtehude live and in person, which, when you think about it, was the only way to hear somebody perform back then. We know that Bach stayed 3 months at the foot of the master. I want to play for you now a piece that Bach may have heard, the Chaconne in E minor by Dietrich Buxtehude. A chaconne is a set of variations, typically on a short harmonic progression, a theme in the pedals you'll hear, and you'll hear a lot of repetition in this piece. It's 4 bars that repeats kind of over and over with constantly changing variations in the fingers. I think that this was a specialty for Buxtehude. He was alone among his contemporaries in northern Germany writing this kind of music for organ. So I suspect it's something he could have played for Bach. I'd like to invite you to imagine that you are the young Bach, walking into St. Mary's Church in Lübeck and hearing Buxtehude play this. Thank you. When I prefaced the piece I just played for you, I suggested that what you just heard might be what Bach heard. It's possible the notes are the same, but in some ways, it certainly isn't what Bach heard. Because you see, Bach heard an entirely different organ, an instrument much larger than ours, constructed differently. He heard it in a room much bigger than ours. That church has an echo in it, a reverb of 5 or 6 seconds. It's absolutely amazing. Go visit sometime. You see, all organs are quite different from each other. They're usually built to fit a room, and they typically reflect a regional or national style of organ building. So you see there are Italian Baroque organs, there are German Romantic organs, French symphonic organs, American theater organs, etc., etc. And they're all quite different. If Buxtehude had wanted to play the piece that I just played on an organ in London, he couldn't have, because English organs at that time didn't have pedals. When you think of it, the situation is entirely different when it comes to the violin, or the piano, or the saxophone. These are all instruments that have become rather standardized. If I ask you how many keys are on a grand piano, there's 88, right? Good, very good class. If you ask me how many keys are on an organ, I have to ask you which organ. Our organ has 32 keys in the pedals, but our practice organ downstairs has 30 keys because it's a bit more German than this organ. That's just how organs are. But a Steinway grand piano, going back to the piano for a moment, doesn't sound radically different from a Bösendorfer grand piano built in Austria. And you wouldn't assume that Austrian grand pianos play Beethoven and Mozart better than American Steinways, which only play Scott Joplin. That doesn't make sense. Or if you think about even an old instrument, take a $4 million Stradivarius violin, 300 years old, you would think that it has an immediately recognizable quality of sound, that you would hear somebody play it and your jaw would drop and the heavens would open and you'd say, that's a Stradivarius. And they're special instruments, to be sure. But they've done some interesting listening experiments where they've blindfolded concert violinists and made them pick a Stradivarius out of a lineup that includes some 20th century violins. And let's just say it's harder than you think. Go home and Google Stradivarius. Getting back to the organ and getting around to our organ, I mention all of this because I want you to understand how unique organs can be. An individual organ can be very unique, very special, and ours most certainly is. It was built in 1968 by the French-Canadian firm of Casavant. That's one of the great organ building houses of the world. They're still in existence, still making lots of organs. Robert Cavara, the organ professor in 1968, achieved a minor miracle, convincing our university to purchase this instrument at a cost, I'm told, of $80,000. If we had to replace this instrument today, build this identical instrument, a high-end quality instrument of this size and disposition, it would cost well over $1 million. So, good investment, university. I looked up an article by Bob Cavara because I wanted his words as to what this organ is. He wrote that it is, quote, built in the North European tradition with strict adherence to the architectural, acoustical, and aesthetic ideals of the Werkprinzip. I think I should break that down for you a bit. Yeah. First, it's in the North European tradition, which is to say that its tonal style is meant to evoke the great organs of the 17th and 18th centuries in northern Germany, in the Netherlands, in Denmark. I think it's safe to say that our organ speaks with a German accent, which is why the first piece I chose to play for you was by a northern German composer. Our organ, it tells me it wants to play that kind of music. Second, Kavara's description mentions that the organ has a strict adherence to the architectural, acoustical, and aesthetic ideals of Werkprinzip. Werkprinzip is a German term, a little technical here, for a philosophy of organ building that says that each division, or Werk, of the organ, each keyboard controls a different part of the organ, a different division. And each of those divisions should be enclosed in a case. It should stand on its own as its own little organ, independent. And it should be in balance with the other divisions of the organ. So I want to show you what I mean. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So this box of whistles right here in the middle of the organ, it's called the Brustwerk. And Brust in German means chest, breast. It's in the heart of the organ here. It's controlled on the third manual. You pull the stops and it starts the sound. And that little flute is the rectangular pipes that you see along the back of the box. Not all of you can see it, but look later. That little reedy sound, those are the conical pipes along the front. And there's these rows of different pipes have different construction, they make different kinds of sounds, but that's the division of the Brustwerk right here. The next manual, the Positiv, plays pipes encased way up top. It's fun to take the students up ladders into the top of the organ there. Do you hear a little bit of difference? One is a little stronger, a little meatier. They get stronger as you go down here. And the bottom keyboard controls the Hauptwerk division. Those pipes are along both sides here, left and right. Depending on where you're sitting, you don't get the stereo effect, do you? Were some of you able to hear it? Okay. Yeah, that's a very strong division. The pedals are their own manual, their own division down here. They usually play the bass tones. This, by the way, is the lowest pitch of the organ. Some of you might not hear that, actually. This isn't a hearing test, but believe me, Dad, that's there. The last thing I should say is that the keys are mechanically connected to the pipes with a kind of technology that hasn't changed a whole lot since the 16th century. When I press that key down, it pulls on a piece of wood that pulls another rod and wire that pulls another spring, eventually, that lets air into a pipe. And that was your first organ lesson. You did really well. Now, what I demonstrated to you might not seem very special unless you understand a little bit about where the organ was in the 20th century. With the advent of electricity, organ builders found it easier, more desirable sometimes, to connect the keys to the pipes with electrical signals. It means you can pull the keys away from the organ. The organist doesn't have to sit inside the organ. And you can stuff pipes anywhere you want. You can put pipes in the corners of the choir loft. You could put pipes in the balcony. Anywhere that you can run a wire, you can put a pipe. Right? And this was a certain philosophy of organ building that went away from this encased mechanical action instrument that you see behind you. When Robert Cavara declared that he wanted this instrument to be mechanical action, and he wanted it to have this North European disposition, people thought he was crazy. And he was a little crazy, God rest his soul. But when people heard the organ, you know, it made believers. And Bob was an evangelist. I'd like to go back for a moment to the story of Bach and Buxtehude. 20-year-old Bach has just had this wonderful experience studying with the master. He walks 250 miles back home, and he sets out writing his own organ works. And it's a really fruitful period in his life for organ compositions, including one of his masterpieces, which I want to play right now, the Passacaglia in C minor. It's a piece that many people think was inspired by the first piece I played. It's a similar kind of piece, variations over this short theme that repeats in the bass. The two works are also a little different, and I want to tell you how I feel them different. This is my own little take on it, so take it or leave it. But Buxtehude's work is rather short, and it seems to just start in the middle of something, doesn't it? It seems to really grab you emotionally from the beginning. When I play that piece, I feel like I'm stepping into a river. And it doesn't really matter where that piece started, and it doesn't really matter where that piece ends. What really matters is the flow of that piece, the music just pulling you along. It's a marvelous piece. Bach works a little differently. His theme seems to, in some ways, grow, and it seems to have more direction to me. It seems to take you somewhere. You end up in the most marvelous places. The piece reaches this fantastic climax, full organ, and then all of a sudden, before you know what hit you, Bach starts a fugue, which was his specialty, of course. But it's like he's squeezing every last bit out of that theme. Stunning resolution and arrival at the end. I hope you enjoy Bach's Passacaglia in C minor. This instrument is clearly a beautiful work of art, and it's a treasure for our university. In the years immediately following its installation, famous organists came from around the world to teach and perform on it. Really, the best of the best. There were important summer courses on this instrument, so organists came from all over the country to study on it too. And soon word spread that CSU had something special. Not only did people want to travel to Fort Collins to hear it, but they wanted to recreate the sound and the feel of it in other places. This style of organ building, grounded in historical models, yet with 20th century technique, it was part of a trend that our organ was at the forefront of. It was a trend that was especially felt in university settings. So in 1968, there were only a couple major mechanical action instruments at American universities. There was Harvard, there was CSU, and it was a short list. Today there are too many to count. Really, there are too many to count. I was asked by a university recently to give advice on an organ project, and one of the first things they said was, well, of course we want a mechanical action instrument. And that, of course, is in no small part due to our instrument here. And that's something that fills me with a bit of pride. When I came to CSU in 2005, as was mentioned earlier by our provost, I was informed that this organ would be moved from its prior location to the room it is in today. And that was an arduous process, and not without risk. I lost a fair amount of sleep during those years. When you think about it, there are 2,000 pipes in this organ, and there's at least as many things that can go wrong when you're moving it, right? It's an instrument of historic value, and as I said earlier, organs are built for rooms, so this instrument was built for a different room, really. Would it sound good in this room? I hope I've answered some of that tonight. But the motivation for moving the organ was always really clear. Bob Cavara said to me and to everyone who would listen that this organ needed to remain at the center of the musical life of this university. That's something I understand better now than I did 12 years ago. In ways that I never expected, this organ has brought the best out of all of us. And I am so glad that it is here. I called this lecture Listening to the Past, but I'd like to play one final piece in these reflections, if I may. And it's a piece very much of the present. Well, actually, it was written about the time that this organ was installed. But it sounds very contemporary. It's a piece by Gaston Letez. He was a French organist, blind from birth, and known as a very skilled improviser. His few compositions are all rather kind of dark and gloomy, a little mysterious, and this one isn't. A French organist told me that he inserted a theme into the prelude. It's a prelude in a dance fugue, he calls it. And that Letez inserted a theme into the prelude for his granddaughter, who liked horses. And it's a galloping theme. You'll hear bum ba-da-dum, 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 ba-da-dum. So you'll hear this dark, gloomy music every now and then bum ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum. So it's like the horsey music interrupts the sad music. So it's a little bit of equine science in my lecture. I'd like some extra points for that. And the fugue is very à la Bach, right? But it starts in the feet. It's not the place you normally start a fugue. And it's really fast in the feet. And the fugue is music that kind of takes itself too seriously for a while. Very modern and serious. Until this dance rhythm comes in. And it's a rumba, bum, ba-dum, bum, ba-dum. And the rumba overtakes everything, and by the end of the piece, it's all rumba. So thank you so much for listening today. And I hope we have some questions after this piece. Prelude and Dance Fugue by Gaston Lettez.
as a former large animal veterinarian, I would say I've seen dark and gloomy horses, but never one that could rumba. That was amazingly done. Thank you.
They have dancing horses in Vienna.
They do. They do. So we have a couple of presidential ambassadors that have microphones. I think there's going to be one coming to the balcony, and there's one down here now. And if you have questions for Dr. Bacon, just raise your hand, and here's one up here and one there as well. We'll get a microphone to you.
Yeah, what powers this thing? I mean, something's driving a lot of air through those pipes, right? It's not your fingers and toes, I don't think.
There is a fan, a motor. We keep it backstage. It's quieter that way. And the air travels through little wooden channels into the instrument. Back when Bach and Buxtehude were around, you had to pump these things by hand, of course, and it would take a couple people with bellows or trundles, and yeah. We have it easy. We turn it on.
I think we had one in the center up here.
Can you retell the story? I remember Robert Guevara telling about how he got approval for the funding.
I was curious about that myself, actually.
You're not supposed to.
I wasn't around at the time, but it's something about sneaking it onto a Board of Governors budget when they had just approved another large ticket item that was also built around 50 years ago.
And to fill in the blank, we're talking, I'm sure, about Hughes Stadium. And I did a little mental arithmetic after you gave that. The rate of inflation on organs has vastly exceeded the rate of inflation on stadiums. But apparently they last longer as well.
That's a good question. Most players these days, I think, prefer a mechanical instrument. I do. I feel like it gives me more connection to the instrument. It's almost like you can feel the wind under your fingers. To a certain extent, you can shape the articulation of how the pipe speaks if you press it more gently at the beginning or release it more gently at the end. These are subtle things, to be sure. But some organs there are very good electric action organs. Some instruments are so detached from the organ that you play and you don't really feel connected to the instrument. Sometimes there's even a time delay. Sometimes that can be a fun challenge. And sometimes that allows an organist to be in the middle of a stage where they can be seen instead of always with a back to the audience or up in a loft somewhere. Sometimes a detached console is very, very nice that way, and I appreciate being closer to the audience. The community, I mean, right?
I have the microphone, but I don't want to use it. I appreciated the talk. Thanks so much. It was great. So you spoke about the site specificity and the instrument specificity. Sure. Is there an example of a piece or a composer you would just not play on this organ or some other specific organ?
That is a good question. My students know we play everything on this organ, really. We play things that probably weren't ever meant to be played on this organ. But because it leans a little bit Baroque, it is not always appropriate for certain types of romantic music that involve gradual crescendos and decrescendos. This organ works dynamically with changing manuals or adding stops. They're terraces of dynamics, we say. And other instruments, they enclose pipes in boxes. This was a 19th century invention. And you put louvers on the box, and you open them with a little gas pedal, as you play. And you can, when the louvers are open, more sound comes out. And when they're shut, it sounds farther away. During this period in organ building, organ builders were theorizing that that was kind of an unnatural way to build an instrument. You want to put a piano inside a box and then open and shut a door to hear it, right? You know, the piano makes its dynamics more naturally than that. But I don't know if that answers the question, but I would say certain types of romantic music might not fit here as well as they do other places.
Let's see, we've got 3 more down here. I'm not sure where the microphone is at.
I have a mic.
I'll just say it out loud. How do you control the volume? I mean, is it on the,
Well,
I don't know the terminology for all
Sure.
the parts, but
the knobs on the sides we call stops. And I'll show you just a little bit. I can walk to the organ, right?
Yes.
Excuse me for a moment. You
I've
draw
never
one
had
stop.
leave during this part.
Nothing plays until you draw a stop. And then there's one pipe for every key that I'm playing, a different pipe of a different length. This one is 8 feet long from the mouth. It's kind of, I think it's that one. That's over there, right? You go an octave higher, it's 4 feet long, 2 feet long, half a foot. I don't usually play sideways. But the more stops you pull, pulling out all the stops is what we call it. That's what we call it in the biz, gentlemen.
Question. The fan that you are describing that is in the rear back there, is it in effect a low-tech air compressor? And is it sending air into a manifold that services, I would think, all of the pipes?
Our organ technician is in the house. I feel like I should defer, but the answer is yes. Yeah, and the air is kept under pressure with bellows. 2,000 years ago, there was a version of the pipe organ in ancient Greece called the hydraulis. And it was a water organ. They used water pressure to keep the air at a constant pressure. And that difference let the air into the pipes. So they played the hydraulis in the Colosseum. You know, we say Nero, the Emperor Nero, almost certainly did not fiddle while Rome burned because violins hadn't been invented. But he could have played the hydraulis as Rome burned. Holmes? Okay.
Yes. You think of organs as being in churches, but of course organs are in theaters, private homes, and a few of them in universities. You got some idea what the breakdown is, or 90% of them in churches? And furthermore, if you sort of see an organ, is one kind of organ built for churches, another kind built for universities, or are they pretty much the same?
That's a very good question. I think the vast majority of organs in the world are found in churches. Home organs are by necessity smaller, right? That's basically what distinguishes a pipe organ that you would put in your house. Theater organs were meant to have a lot of bang for the buck, very high wind pressures and loud sounds that you could control in different ways, and lots of special effects, you know, drums and boat sirens and gongs, and for the special effects you needed in the movies. There is some debate today whether there should be a difference between a concert hall organ and a church organ. I think that every congregation that decides to build an organ, and God bless them, right? Every congregation that builds an organ needs to know what their congregation sings, how they worship, what's right for them. And that can differ, you know. An Episcopal church that sings, you know, very kind of high Anglican, you know, choral music might want a more English sounding organ than a Lutheran church down the road that just wants a lot of Bach. You know? But concert organs are also very special. There's a repertoire for orchestra and organ. And the organ, typically, when it plays with the orchestra, it fills out the parts of the orchestra that it does best, which are the really low pitches, these really sustained low tones. So sometimes in concert halls, bigger than this one, you find organs that are really bottom heavy, and that also have stops that can ride over the whole orchestra. So the organ in the Symphony Center in Dallas, for example, is a brilliant example of an organ built to be played with the orchestra. And you wouldn't necessarily want it in your church.
Let's see, several questions around.
How much of the resulting sound is due to what the composer wrote versus what the organist, what stops the organist decides to use?
Oh, yes. Very good. You know, as the closer we get to our own time, you know, 20th century music, composers in all fields, you know, for piano, for other instruments, they're more specific about what they want in general. You know, they tell performers very clearly, this articulation, this sound, this dynamic, this tempo, right? And it's the same with organ music generally. Organists, organ composers of this century, last century, are writing very specifically which stops to use. And you have to adapt that when you get to an organ that doesn't have those stops. But back into the Baroque, there were just conventions. I played that Buxtehude piece at the beginning, full organ, because I like the way it sounds that way. But I know other people who play that piece very quietly. You can have two radically different interpretations of a piece just by which stops you pull, which is something really interesting about the organ.
Joel, in the Philippines, outside of Manila, there is a bamboo organ. How much difference would that make?
I imagine it's really hard to tune. You know, the material that you use for pipes does change the sound. We were talking earlier, before the lecture, the pipes you see, the metal pipes, the shiny ones, that's a combination of lead and tin. It's an alloy. And it has a certain distinctive organ kind of sound. You build with a little more lead, it sounds a little darker. You build with a little more tin, it sounds edgier, brighter. You build a pipe out of wood, it sounds flutier. Typically, there's different qualities of construction. There's organs that are entirely made out of wooden stops. Those can be very beautiful. These early Italian organs that are only made out of wood.
Got a question up in the balcony.
You mentioned that there were around 2,000 pipes, I believe.
That's right.
And unless my eyes are deceiving me, and you said that also that a key was connected to a pipe.
Right.
Well, I don't think that there are 2,000 keys or foot pedals up there, so I'm sort of missing the connection there. Could you explain a little how how all the pipes come into play.
Yeah. So one key can control many different pipes if you draw different stops. So when I held that, I'll do it again. So we have one pipe, 2 pipes, 3 pipes, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. That's 12 pipes right there. And times 56. You can play all 3 keyboards at once, by the way. You can couple these together so that when I press a key down here, and let's say I have this sound here, and let's say I had something different up here. It's playing all 3 Fs at once. It's just mechanically linking them, which makes it kind of physically more challenging to play. That's why I'm sweating up here and grunting every now and then. It's not it.
Jim, I think you had a question.
I had a more general question, not to delve too far into the realm of politics, but my question is, I'd like your opinion on what would happen if or what is the importance of the National Endowment for the Arts, and what would be the consequences if it were to be defunded?
Well, I'm not too much of an expert in public policy and music there. Specifically with the organ, I know that there are organ renovation projects that get funded that way. I've been active with the Organ Historical Society, which the history of the organ is very long, very complicated, and the Organ Historical Society is a great organization that collects all kinds of documents, books, designs of organs, and preserves our history of the organ in America. So part of the story that I'm telling you tonight is preserved in letters and books and all kinds of other ways. Just briefly about that. The man who is most responsible for designing and building this organ, Lawrence Phelps, was a friend of Robert Cavara. He worked for Casavant. And when he passed away, his wife, Dame Gillian Weir, a very famous concert organist, donated all of his papers and letters and archives to our library. So Morgan Library houses the Lawrence Phelps archives, one of the great American organ builders. There was recently, this last year, a book came out about him and included part of the story of our organ. But it's projects like that I think are really, really important as we continue to keep the culture of playing the organ alive. Which reminds me of something I read when I was looking up that article from Robert Cavara. He mentioned that this fabulously famous organist from France had come to play the organ when it was first installed, Marie-Claire Alain. And they were trying to impress upon her how unique it was that CSU, an agricultural, a university with an agricultural history, had an instrument like this. And apparently her response was, there's not so much difference between culture and agriculture, is there?
I think we had another one up in the balcony.
It's a little bit more personal question, but I know you've played the organ around the world. Do you have a specific organ that you've fallen in love with or that you've most enjoyed playing, and is there a reason why?
Yeah. That's like asking somebody who their favorite child is. And my mother is here, and I know she would tell you that I'm the favorite. But
Didn't see that coming, did you?
I love this organ very dearly. There's an organ in Austria, near Vienna, close to Neuburg. I would go back to in a heartbeat and play. Yeah, certain instruments mean more to me typically when I have a personal connection to the organist or people there on site. But I think it was the organist Marcel Dupré who said that his favorite organ was the one he was currently playing. And that's really the only organ that matters.
Down here in the front.
Dr. Behuch.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. Anytime I talk about this organ being moved, people say, well, didn't the whole thing get shipped to Europe and shipped back? I thought, no, I think we shipped the repair people in and had some local people work on it as well.
Yeah.
So, like those big pipes, something must have gotten bent.
No. They were actually it was really carefully handled. I mean, people that deal with organ and organ maintenance are the most detailed people on earth, and I'm very grateful for them. But no, there were no major issues. Parts of the organ were sent across the country to be cleaned, and certain pipes were shipped in from Germany. That's true, but it was really the people that came and worked on them. We had a team from Denmark come at the end and make sure that every pipe was going to resonate just right in this room. All 2,060 something, 96, thank you.
I think we have time for one more question. Who has the microphone? There you go.
I was just curious how you tune it.
Oh.
How do you tune the organ?
With a butter knife? No, that's not really the way. It depends how the pipe's constructed. A lot of the pipes have a metal sleeve on top, and if you adjust the sleeve up, it makes the pipe slightly longer, and that makes the pitch go flat. And then you can tap on the top of the sleeve, and the pipe goes short and sharp. Some pipes have a wooden plunger in them. The wooden pipes along the back in that box, you can see the wooden stoppers. The pipes in front of them have little chimneys. They're called chimney flutes. And you can raise the chimney up and down. The pipes in the facade are so pretty, you wouldn't want to stick anything on the top of them. So they're cut in back. And part of the metal of the pipe at the top is rolled back, scrolled back. We call it scroll tuning. And you only do that every now and then. But you can actually change the pitch of the pipe just by rolling the metal. And we tune, when the weather changes, the pipes respond in different ways to the temperature and humidity. And so you got to tweak things up a bit, go through the entire organ as often as you can, as often as your budget allows. Generously support our organ program.
Yet another first for a President's Community Lecture Series. Ladies and gentlemen, the Stewart and Sheron Golden, holder of the Stewart and Sheron Golden Endowed Chair in Organ and Liturgical Studies, Dr. Joel Bacon.